everyone, Kristina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm going to be using the vintage Mosaics stamp set that was just released not long ago to create a really fun watercolor card. It's going to be monochromatic, only using blues, and I'm going to be painting all with Simons Stamp Positively Saturated inks. I'm starting out by positioning the 6 mosaic, kind of more square-shaped designs on the stamp set on top of some watercolor paper. This is Strathmore cold-pressed watercolor paper. It's from the pre-cut 5x7 pack, and I've just trimmed it down to be slightly larger than an A2 card so that I can paint it edge to edge, but also tape it down to a hardboard. I did put on some pencil lines to try to get these stamp images lined up just right. But in the end, I just ignored the pencil lines and just went off of how it looked visually. I'm inking up the stamps in a Versamark ink, and I'm going to be adding some embossing powder to these so that it can create a resist when I go to paint over the top. So I'm going to be doing the designs in white embossing powder, and then I can paint over the top. Now, normally when you see designs like this, it would be on tiles and the designs would be blue and the background would be white. So I'm sort of swapping that, and I'll have the design be white and the background be blue, or a very like faded blue watercolor effect. Sprinkling on the white embossing powder. This is Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus, Monroe. And then I hit that with my heat tool, and it was really hard to see when it was melted. So if you do the same, just make sure you tip it in the light. And when you see that the surface of the powder has turned glossy, move on to another section. You don't want to overexpose the paper to your heat tool and possibly burn it. Starting out with the color Marine. I think that's what this one's called. No, it's Royal. This one's Royal. This next one is Marine. And I'm also going to use the color Cadette. And I'm smushing these onto a palette off to the side. This is just a piece of plastic. This palette is from Art Impressions. And then I'm going to wet my entire watercolor panel with a nice big coat of water. And then I have a smaller brush, and I'm adding moisture to my pools of ink so that it's much more fluid, and then dropping it in over on top of my project. Now, this is a wet on wet technique, and when you're painting wet on wet, it just means that you're bringing wet paint onto a wet paper, and when you do that, the color blooms out and is very soft. So it's going to give a really cool effect going around these designs. Now, like I mentioned before, this is a resist technique, and that means that the heat embossed areas that I melted with my heat tool that are very slick and kind of have a glazed look to them, all of those areas will resist any of the paint or ink that I place on top, and it's going to leave just the white embossed area behind. So it's a really fun effect to do with watercolor, and in particular, this time we're doing it with inks. So this is another way that you can stretch the use of your inks. Any dye-based ink will do this. So all of the Simons Stamp inks, with the exception of the white pigment ink and also the clear ink, and distress inks. There's a lot of companies that have dye inks, Altenew, Concord and Ninth. A lot of those ink lines are carried in the Simons Stamp store. So anything that is a dye-based or water-based ink will work for this particular technique of just smushing the ink onto a palette and then picking it up with a wet brush. I did use a heat tool to speed along the drying process, and then I created my greeting. I'm using the Just Because die set from Simon, and I'm cutting it out of some Sizzix cardstock. This is the gold pearl from their opulent paper pack. That pack has a lot of different kind of special finishes for your cardstocks, and they all cut beautifully. Run that through my die cutting machine just once, and then I'm also going to cut it out 3 additional times out of some white cardstock. I thought it'd be nice to stack this greeting so it was a little bit more substantial. So I'm using some Honeybee precision glue. I'm just putting on some dots of glue all over this greeting, and I'm holding it down with some tweezers. And then once I have enough glue all over the greeting, I'll pick up one of the other white die cuts and place it directly on top. And by using a liquid glue, that gives me a chance to kind of wiggle the top layer around and make sure that it's positioned just right. So I'll put this third layer of white right on top, and it's pretty substantial as is, just with these 3 layers, but I'm going to add that gold layer on top, and then it'll be nice and thick. So I'm placing that right on top, making sure it's lined up. And if you have any glue that kind of squidges out from under the edges, if your glue dries clear, like the honeybee glue that I'm using, no need to clean it up. It won't even show in the final project. I'm using the Waffle Flower A2 layers dies to choose a slightly smaller than A2 die, and then I'm going to use that to cut out my watercolor panel. Run that through my die cutting machine, and now I have this piece that's perfectly sized to go on top of an A2 card. Before I start assembling the card, I'm going to use the outer kind of halo or shadow shape for my greeting, and I'm going to cut it out using the die. And this is going to give me a chance to have the white of the card base showing through, and then I can have the greeting right on top. So I've run that through my die cutting machine, and now I'm going to start assembling my card. And this card comes together super quick at this point. I put some foam adhesive on the back of my watercolor panel, making sure to cover almost every single bit of surface area. Then I put it down onto my A2 sized card. This is just some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 110-pound cardstock that has already been cut and folded to an A2 card size. And if you're unfamiliar with what that size is, that is 5.5 inches wide by 4 1/4 inch tall. Put some liquid glue on the back of my stacked greeting, and then place that right down into that window that I've cut out of my watercolor panel. And there we go. That finishes the card. This is a very simple card, but really fun technique with that watercolor and the heat emboss resist. Thanks so much for watching today. Everything I've used today is available at simonstamp.com. The dies, the stamps, the inks, and even the paintbrushes. Thanks so much for watching today. I will catch you guys in another video very soon.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.